Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Katya and today I'm sharing my thoughts on 6 books ranging from fantasy to translated literary fiction. Toward the end of the video, I'm also highlighting some booktube channels and including a short clip from last week's bookstore browsing in Cambridge with my nieces who visited from the Netherlands. Anyway, books. We start off with Legends and Lattes. This is a fabulous cozy fantasy novel, and many of you will have already heard of the book if you follow fantasy-specific booktube channels. This is a self-published novel by Travis Baldree, or was self-published, and then it was picked up by Tor following its huge success. They also have the rights to the second book, which will be a standalone novel set in the same world. Now, Travis Baldree is already a well-known audiobook narrator, and Legends and Latte is his debut novel. And what a debut! The cover art by illustrator Carson Lohmiller also gives you a flavour of this book. Warm colours, friendly cafe vibe. It is like a warm hug or your favourite warm drink during a cold winter. Cozy and satisfying. So the book blends slice of life with fantasy and you get a feeling of kinship with place and character, even though it's a fantasy world with a medieval vibe. So it's really weird, like I feel I know an orc or a succubus and what it's like to wander ye old street to order myself a piping hot cuppa. It's the brilliance of the seemingly effortless narrative that you just accept this. The story centers on Viv, worn out from years of battle, fulfilling the stereotype of orc barbarian. Think wielding fear-inducing megasword. She decides to retire but is a little bit worried about how this significant change will impact her life, and she puts her faith in a legendary artifact. Then she sinks her money in the risky venture of opening up a cafe in the city of Thun, a community and place that she doesn't know and whose residents wouldn't know a coffee bean if it struck them in the forehead. If you're looking for a mood lifter, this book works so well. It's about friendship, found family, community, and love. It's also about good food and drink and taking a leap of faith. Now, I was getting Discworld vibes for the setting. Not that they are caricature-like characters, madcap adventures, and satire. It's really about the place and the normalization of having an orc dream of coffee and cake rather than battle. I'm really looking forward to book number 2. Legends and Lattes has a whopping rating of 4.58 on Goodreads. And you know what? It's a good feel read, so why not? 4.58, I'll agree with that. Then we go on to At Dusk by Hwang Sok Yong, and this was a buddy read with Rainer at Rainier Books, with whom I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. I've linked Rainer's channel in the video description so you can check out his thoughts on the book. Set in contemporary South Korea, there are flashbacks which take us to the 1970s and 1980s. Now, the main character, Park Min-woo, is a man in his 60s who, by every external measure, is a success story. He's born into poverty in a miserable neighborhood in Seoul. He has then ridden the wave of development in a rapidly modernizing society. Now that he's director of a large architectural firm, his hard work and ambition have brought him triumph and satisfaction. Or have they? So, when he's contacted by his childhood sweetheart, Cha Soo-na, while his company is also being investigated for corruption, Min-woo begins to reconsider his role in the transformation of his country, and soon he begins to recall in detail his past and his role in it no longer existing, the past world that is. So I think if you're interested in recent Korean history, you'll really enjoy this. It's short, so it doesn't dive into historical events in great detail, but it gives you a real flavour for the rapid economic change Korea underwent in the 1980s. It also touches on the controversial third president of South Korea, who was assassinated in 1979, and the 1980 Gwangju uprising. These events are all backdrops in his memories when he's reflecting on how he fell in love with Cha Soo-na and why he left her behind. So that's the key thing. We get to share the point of view also of a second character, Zhang Wuhi, a woman in her 20s, and in some ways Minwoo represents an older generation of Koreans, while Wuhi, the younger. And the book description says, it says, one of Korea's most renowned and respected authors continues his gentle yet urgent project of evaluating Korea's past and examining the things and the people that have been given up in a never-ending quest to move forward. Sometimes I disagree with blurbs, but this one is spot on, and Raina and I discuss just how effectively the author used the perspectives of Minwoo and Woo-hee to highlight that rapid change in Korea. Now, Minwoo is a person who is pushed or has always pushed forward, and the new generation, Woo-hee, is circumspect and has different values. I'd love to have done a deep dive of this book, and I might still do it if anyone's interested. But in effect, I think it lends itself really well to a buddy read or a book club discussion. It is very well crafted, and everything, all the details are meaningful. There is a little bit at the end with foxgloves, and I was saying to Rainer, I think there's some symbolism here and it's got a deeper meaning. And he said, yes. But neither one of us could actually pinpoint what that deeper meaning was. So if you're currently reading it, perhaps look out for hints as to that. I'm definitely going to reread it as well. But yes, it's a very good book. Rated 3.69 on Goodreads, and I rated 4 stars. Then we go on to Blindness by Jose Saramago and translated by Juan Segar. Published in Portuguese in 1995, and the English translation came out in October 1997. And soon after, Saramago received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1998. It's also been a New York Times bestseller, so it's, got a lot of accolades. In Blindness, City is hit by a sudden and strange epidemic of white blindness, which spares no one. Authorities confine the affected to an empty mental hospital, and soon social conventions crumble and the struggle for survival brings out the worst in people. The story isn't told from a particular character's perspective, but the wife of the third person to have been affected pretends to be blind in order to be relocated with him. She then acts as the one eyewitness to this nightmare while supporting 7 strangers during the story. She is particularly attached to her husband, a boy with no mother, and a girl with dark glasses. I went with the audiobook for this because it is currently free on the Audible Plus catalogue, but I understand that the paperback edition has pages filled margin to margin with solid wall of text. There are no dialogue marks, and the speech marks are separated by capital letters. So I thought the audiobook required a lot of attention, and I can only imagine that a physical copy is actually going to require even more attention. The plot is straightforward mostly, and there is, however, a scene in the book where Saramago tries to distinguish between the afflicted and the people who were already blind. I don't think it quite worked for me. I'm not sure the story manages to separate out blindness as a metaphor and being physically blind. The story is set in an unnamed country in the second half of the 20th century, and the sudden white blindness, which is contagious, is used as an allegorical device to represent a hidden meaning with moral and political significance. However, the ending isn't particularly explicit. It is a top-rated book, and about 250,000 people have rated this 4.16 on Goodreads. For me, though, it's a 3. Clearly, I'm in the minority, though. Then we have Venetia by Georgette Heyer, Regency romance. 2 weeks ago, I reviewed Heyer's Frederica, and I really enjoyed that. This time round, we've got a 25-year-old beauty of Yorkshire whose good looks are only rivaled by her kindness, practicality, intelligence, and independence. She's perfection, really. Her future seems safe and predictable. She is nearly resigned to being a spinster because she's in the middle of nowhere, having also inherited the family responsibilities of running an estate because her older brother he's swanning around. So the only 2 people she has interested in her are really wearisome or tiresome suitors. One is really dull and one's immature. And then suddenly on the scene comes Lord Damerel, a gamester, a shocking rake, and a man with a sadly unsteady character. Now, this is the usual sort of like fun format in these Regency romances that Heyer writes, but this time round I did not warm to the male lead. He returns to the estate, but this time around not to host debauched parties for his fellow hedonists. Orgy anyone? No. Lord Damerel comes across Venetia and thinks that she's a country girl, and he takes liberties. And I was like, do you know what? I really don't like this guy. He thinks because he's rich, he can grab a country girl within a minute of seeing her because she's attractive. And it sort of like goes downhill with his supposedly fun personality and stuff, but he was just like two-dimensional for me. Venetia herself didn't disappoint. I found her to be complex and entertaining with a fascinating backstory, you know, the twists that Heyer likes to put in. But goodness, I think Lord Damerel could have been, you know, more developed. About 16,000 people have rated this book 4.11 on Goodreads, and I rated 3.25. The Girl Who Wrote Loneliness by Kyung-Suk Shin. Homesick and alone, a teenage girl has just arrived in Seoul to work in a factory. Her family, still in the countryside, is too impoverished to keep sending her to school, so she works long, sunless days on a stereo assembly line, struggling through night school every evening to achieve her dream of becoming a writer. Now, the author, Kyung-Suk Shin, highlighted this book as being part fact and part fiction. So this semi-autobiographical novel has an article attached to it that I thought this is, you know, really worth spotlighting. Well, it's on Kyung-Suk Shin's website. Like so many South Korean parents at the time, Shin Kyung-Suk's mother saw education as her daughter's best chance of escaping poverty and backbreaking work in the rice fields. So in 1978, she took her 15-year-old daughter to Seoul, where Ms. Shin would lie about her age to get a factory job while attending high school at night to pursue her dream of becoming a novelist. Seoul-bound trains at the time, like the one mother and daughter boarded that night in the book, picked up many young rural South Koreans along the way, part of the migration that fueled South Korea's industrialization, but forever changed the traditional family life. This is a coming-of-age story set against the backdrop of Korea's industrial sweatshops of the late 1970s and 80s. It highlighted, or highlights, the exploitation, oppression, and urbanization that helped catapult Korea's economy out of the ashes of war. Now, many girls and young women were integral to the expansion and were horribly treated, overlooked, and forgotten on these assembly lines. According to the book description, this book was cited as one of the most important literary novels of the decade for South Korea. And it certainly goes into more recent historical detail than a lot of books that I've read recently. It was also useful to read it very close to At Dusk because they touch on very similar events that have taken place, including but not limited to the political instability and riots of the 70s and 80s. Each also highlights the different experiences of men and women during the period of modernization, and there's a much clearer outline in this book about workers and trade unions because we've got this character who's working on an assembly line. You get the sense that the narrator symbolizes what the reader or the reader's mother, sibling, aunt, and so on went through. And similarly, her family represents people that would be well recognized, and she refers to them as cousin and third brother and so on. I think it's not dissimilar to how the two characters in At Dusk were prototypes for their generations, the old and the new South Korea. Anyway, 785 people have rated this, 3.55 on Goodreads, and I rate it 4 stars. Then we get to Guards, the 8th Discworld fantasy novel from Terry Pratchett and the first book in the City Watch subseries. It is a great introduction for Discworld newbies, and expect fun. There is the trademark Discworld action satire and over-the-top characters you can't get enough of. I won't rehash everything here because the read-along wrap-up video is out there, and I've got amazing comments from Rosie and Kevy and Scott, my co-hosts, so I'll just refer back to that. It is rated 4.32 and I give it a full 5 stars. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And are there any of these books that you are now putting onto your wish list to read in the future? I'd love to know. Before I head off though, I also want to say thank you to Gemma from Gem of Books for giving me a shout out this month. In case Gemma's BookTube channel is new to you, she reads widely. She does every genre, and check her out. I've got her linked in the video description. I also want to highlight a video from Books and Bow titled My Complicated Thoughts on Yukio Mishima. Now, Mishima is a well-known Japanese author, and I've seen his books mentioned on several BookTube channels, but I haven't read his work myself. And Willow's video provides mini reviews of a few of Mishima's books, and also some background to the author, who I didn't know was a fascist. I thought the discussion did well in examining how a reader might feel about enjoying some of the books of someone whose main political views they disagree with. And yeah, the backstory of this author is also fascinating. I also want to shout out a new to me channel, Heather Gregg. Loving the content on there right now, and I especially love Heather's original Faking It tag and the video she did on 10 big or large art books. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care. Bye.